I'm Tori Brennan, and I'm 29 years old. Last Thanksgiving, my father stood in front of 30 relatives and grounded me as if I were a disobedient child, simply because I asked what my grandmother had left me in her will. The room laughed. My face burned so intensely I could feel my pulse in my teeth, but I met his eyes and said one word: "All right." The next morning, he knocked on my bedroom door with a satisfied look. "Finally learned your place," he said. Then he saw the empty room. No clothes, no suitcase, no me. Before he could call my number, the doorbell rang. The family lawyer stood on the porch, shaken, holding a briefcase filled with documents my father never knew existed. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "what have you done?" Before I explain what was inside that briefcase, take a moment to like and subscribe if this story connects with you, and leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, let's go back to last September, the morning my grandmother died, when the first piece fell into place. My grandmother, Eleanor Brennan, passed away on a Tuesday morning at Providence Portland Medical Center. She was 87. I received the call from my mother at 6:14 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was already awake at my drafting table in my 480 square foot studio apartment, sketching a rain garden for a client in Lake Oswego. My mother's voice sounded fragile, almost transparent. "It's Grandma Tori. She's gone." I drove the 20 minutes to the hospital in silence. No radio, no podcast, only the sound of Portland rain on the windshield and my breathing. When I arrived, my father was already in the hallway. Richard Brennan, 63, a retired state judge, stood 6'1", wearing his waxed jacket. Even at dawn, he wasn't crying. He was on the phone discussing estate paperwork. I heard phrases like filing timeline and probate schedule before he noticed me and ended the call without a goodbye. My brother Garrett stood beside him, 33, in a dark suit, even in a hospital, his arm around Dad's shoulder like a political partner. They looked united, solid, like a wall. I stood at the far end of the corridor alone, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee I never drank. The last time I had seen Grandma Eleanor, she was in her wheelchair in the garden of her colonial house on Hawthorne Street, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Tori," she said quietly so no one else could hear, "I've taken care of things. You trust me, okay?" I nodded, not fully understanding. Not yet. 3 days later, at the funeral, the church was classic Portland granite, with a tall nave and white lilies everywhere. A mahogany casket shone under the lights. My father delivered the eulogy. For 11 minutes, he spoke about the Brennan legacy, about tradition, and how my son will carry this family forward. He mentioned Garrett by name 4 times. He mentioned my mother once. He did not mention me at all. Afterward, during the reception line, my Aunt Margaret's husband asked what I was doing for work these days. Before I could answer, my father stepped in. "She plants trees for rich people," he said. A few people laughed politely. I felt the heat rise from my chest upward. As I turned to leave, a man I didn't recognize approached. Older, silver hair, wire-rimmed gold glasses. He shook my hand gently. "Your grandmother was very proud of you," he said quietly. "I'll be in touch." Then he disappeared into the crowd before I could ask his name. I didn't know it then, but that man was Harold Caldwell, and he held the key to everything. That evening, 15 of us gathered at the family home for dinner, the Brennan House, a white colonial on Hawthorne Street, with a wrought iron gate and century-old oak trees. My grandmother had built that house using money from her side of the family long before she married my grandfather. I had always loved it. The crown molding, the deep window seats, the backyard garden where Grandma grew roses the color of ballet slippers. Inside, the long oak dining table was set with the family's sterling silver flatware, a set passed down for 3 generations. Candles stood in polished holders, and a bottle of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir rested on the sideboard. Everything was arranged to reflect tradition and stability. My father sat at the head, as expected. He raised his glass. "Mom left everything for me to manage," he announced, scanning the table. "I'll make sure the family assets are distributed to the right people based on capability." His eyes settled on me. "That means you don't need to concern yourself with any of it? Tori, complex matters aren't really your field." Garrett nodded in agreement. His wife Meredith adjusted her Mikimoto pearl necklace and added, "Naturally." I set my fork down. Dad, Grandma told me. Your mother was confused near the end, he interrupted. Whatever she promised you, forget it. My mother, Linda, stared at her plate. She didn't look up. She never did. After dinner, I excused myself and went upstairs to the bedroom I had grown up in. The Frank Lloyd Wright poster I'd taped to the wall at 16 was still there, the edges curling. I sat on the bed and opened the nightstand drawer out of habit. Inside was an envelope that hadn't been there before. Cream-colored stationery with a faint watermark. My name written in blue ink and handwriting I recognized immediately. Shaky, but careful. Grandma's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, sitting cross-legged on the twin bed I'd used from age 5 to 18. The ceiling fan above me wobbled the same way it always had. The room smelled of old wallpaper and cedar. Inside were 2 items. The first was a letter, 2 pages, front and back, in Grandma Eleanor's handwriting. The pen had pressed deeply into the paper, leaving grooves, as if she wanted the words to be permanent, something no one could erase. The second was a photocopy, partial, maybe 6 pages from a longer document. The heading read, Irrevocable Trust Agreement, Eleanor M. Brennan Settlor. Halfway down the first page, highlighted in yellow, was a single line, Beneficiary, Victoria Torrey Brennan. I read the letter as tears ran down my face. Torrey, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your father is already doing what I knew he would do. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him while I was alive. I tried in my own way, but men like your father don't listen to women. They listen to documents. The original trust is with my attorney, Harold Caldwell. His office is on Northwest 23rd Avenue in Portland. The copy I've left you is partial, not enough to prove anything on its own, but enough for you to know I'm telling the truth. Don't show this to anyone. Not your father, not Garrett, not even your mother. I love Linda, but she will tell Richard. Wait for the right time, and Harold will know what to do. You've always been my architect, Torrey, the one who builds. Don't let them tear you down. All my love, Grandma. I folded the letter and held it against my chest. The photocopy was incomplete. I couldn't use it as evidence. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't know Harold Caldwell beyond a name and an address. And my grandmother had been gone for less than 2 days. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. I felt believed in. And someone had put that belief in writing. I drove back to Portland the next morning without saying goodbye. No one noticed, or if they did, no one called. My studio apartment looked exactly the same, plants covering every windowsill, the drafting table layered with tracing paper, and a cold mug of tea from 2 days earlier still sitting by the sink. I loved the space, even though it was small enough that I could touch both walls if I stretched my arms. It was mine, the one place where no one told me I wasn't enough. I sat at my laptop and searched Harold Caldwell, Attorney, Portland. The results appeared immediately. A small office on Northwest 23rd Avenue, solo practice, estate planning and trusts. The headshot showed a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses, the same man from the funeral. I hovered over the phone number. I didn't call. Not yet. Part of me, the part my father had shaped since childhood, kept asking questions. What if Grandma really was confused? What if this meant nothing? What if I called and discovered the one person who believed in me had simply been an elderly woman who didn't understand what she signed? I wasn't ready to risk that. Not yet. Instead, I focused on work. A landscape architecture firm in the Pearl District had a deadline in 2 weeks, a rooftop garden for a new condo development. I needed the income. I still carried $38,000 in student loans, $420 a month, from the single year of law school I attended before leaving to pursue design. The year my father said I had betrayed the family. I was checking my email to confirm project details when I saw it. Buried between a newsletter and a shipping notice was a message from Garrett. Not sent to me, forwarded to me by mistake. Subject line, Trust Amendment Draft Petition. My stomach dropped. I opened it and read the first lines. Then my phone buzzed with a project reminder, and I had to close the laptop and leave for the office. But I had seen enough to understand that whatever my father was planning had already begun. 3 weeks passed. I immersed myself in work. The rooftop project filled 16-hour days, and I let it. Concentration was easier than uncertainty. But the email remained in my inbox, like something lodged under the skin. I hadn't opened it again. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Then my mother called. Tori, your father wants the whole family together for Thanksgiving. Her voice carried that familiar thinness it took on when she was delivering Richard Brennan's instructions and presenting them as invitations. He says he wants to make things better. I almost laughed. My father had never repaired anything. He broke things and then explained that the problem was your weakness. I'll think about it, Mom. Please, honey. He's trying. I told her I'd let her know and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table, a secondhand IKEA piece I had sanded and refinished myself, and opened Garrett's accidentally forwarded email. It was a thread, 7 messages between my brother and my father over 2 weeks. The subject line was accurate: Trust Amendment Draft Petition. Garrett had prepared a legal filing requesting the court to change the beneficiary of Grandma Eleanor's trust. The justification listed was financial incompetence of the named beneficiary, me. The petition described a pattern of unstable career decisions, no significant assets, and outstanding student debt inconsistent with fiduciary responsibility. My brother had written that about me in formal legal language for a court submission. But the line that affected me most wasn't the legal argument. It was Garrett's casual note at the bottom of the thread. She won't fight it. She never fights anything. That's the advantage, Dad. I sat there for a long time. Then I took screenshots of every message, uploaded them to my cloud storage, and saved copies on a thumb drive I kept in my sock drawer. I called my mother back. Tell Dad I'll be there for Thanksgiving. I was going home, but not to repair anything. The next morning, I called Harold Caldwell's office. A receptionist answered, an older woman with a calm, efficient tone. I gave my name. There was a brief pause. Miss Brennan, Mr. Caldwell has been expecting your call. Can you come in today? 2 hours later, I sat across from him in a small office on Northwest 23rd Avenue. Bookshelves covered every wall, leather-bound legal volumes, worn and marked. An aging oriental rug lay across the floor. A mug of coffee sat on his desk, already cold. Harold Caldwell was the man from the funeral. Silver hair, wire-rimmed gold glasses, steady composure. He spoke like someone who measured every word carefully. Your grandmother retained me 20 years ago, he said. I prepared her will and living trust. 8 years ago, after a conversation that concerned her, she asked me to establish an irrevocable trust naming you as sole beneficiary. He opened a leather portfolio and slid a document toward me. Thick cream paper, an Oregon notary seal. Signatures at the bottom. $620,000 in an educational trust managed by U.S. Bank. Irrevocable, he explained, means your father, as trustee, cannot change the beneficiary. Any modification requires your written consent or a court ruling based on evidence that the settlor lacked mental capacity at the time of signing. He paused. Your grandmother anticipated that issue. Her physician, Dr. Margolis, conducted a cognitive evaluation the same week. The results are in the file. She was fully competent. I took the first full breath I'd managed in weeks. There's more, Caldwell continued. Your father filed a petition 3 weeks ago requesting a beneficiary change. He named Garrett. He informed the court he was unable to locate you to obtain consent. His expression tightened slightly. We both know that is inaccurate. I showed him the email thread. He read it carefully, then looked up. This demonstrates a deliberate breach of fiduciary duty. If you want to contest this, you have the evidence you need. I want to contest it. He nodded, then added, almost casually, there is one more matter. Your grandmother also left you the cottage at Cannon Beach. It is part of the trust. I don't believe your father is aware of it. He never reviewed the full document. I stared at him. The Cannon Beach house, the small cedar cottage where Grandma took me every summer, where we sat on the porch watching Haystack Rock turn gold at sunset. She once told me it was her favorite place in the world. She left it to me. Harold Caldwell met my gaze. Your grandmother understood what would happen after her passing. She spent the last 8 years making sure you were protected. He closed the portfolio. The question is, when do you want to use this? Thanksgiving, I said. He's invited the entire family, about 30 people. Caldwell studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I packed a small bag. 1 change of clothes, my camel wool coat, the best thing I owned, bought secondhand from a consignment shop on Alberta Street, a toothbrush, and a manila folder filled with notarized copies. The originals remained with Caldwell in his office safe. We agreed on that. The originals were for court. The copies were for the family. I drove south through Oregon's autumn hills. The leaves had turned amber and rust, and the sky held that familiar northwest gray that never fully committed to rain. The Brennan house appeared through the trees as it always had, white colonial exterior, wrought iron gate, the old oak standing guard. From the outside it looked like a postcard, the image of a perfect family. That was the point. My mother met me at the door. She held the hug a moment too long, the way she did when she wanted to speak but wouldn't. "Your father's in the study," she said quietly. "He's not in a good mood." I carried my bag upstairs to my old room. The Frank Lloyd Wright poster was still there. The twin bed. The nightstand drawer now empty. I had taken the envelope last time. Downstairs, I heard Garrett's voice, Meredith's bright practice laugh, and the sound of glasses touching. I knelt and slid the manila folder under the mattress. Then I walked to the window. The backyard garden, Grandma's peony beds, was overgrown and gray. No one had cared for it since she became too ill to work outside. The sight tightened my throat. I placed my hand against the cold glass and said quietly, "I'm here, Grandma." Downstairs, the cabernet was open. The granite fireplace burned steadily. My father remained seated when I entered. "Oh," he said, looking at me from his leather chair. "You came." Garrett sat beside Meredith, turning his wine glass slowly. He glanced at my coat, second-hand, worn at the elbows. "Still haven't upgraded the car, huh, Tor?" I smiled, sat down, and said nothing. The next day, 30 relatives would fill the house. My father had organized the largest Thanksgiving gathering in Brennan family history, far larger than usual. I didn't know his reason yet, but I understood one thing. Richard Brennan never acted without an audience. Thanksgiving morning, the house filled like a theater before a performance. Cars lined the street by 10. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Don from Bend, the Paulson cousins from Eugene. Great Aunt Judith flew in from Scottsdale. By noon, 32 people were inside, and the sound filled every room. Laughter, glasses touching, children running through hallways, the oven timer sounding every 20 minutes. I helped in the kitchen because no one asked me to do anything else. Linda and Meredith sat at the breakfast nook drinking tea while I chopped celery for the stuffing. That seemed appropriate. The family roles hadn't changed since I was 12. At 4 o'clock, we sat down to eat, the long oak dining table seated 18. The overflow guests sat at a folding table in the adjoining living room. I was placed there, between my 9-year-old second cousin Oliver and an empty chair. At the main table, my father stood at the head beneath the crystal chandelier. A white linen cloth covered the table, the family's sterling silver reflecting the candlelight. He raised his glass of Pinot Noir. "This Thanksgiving is special," he began, using the same courtroom voice that filled spaces and concluded arguments. "We lost Mom this year, but the Brennan family remains strong, and I'm especially proud of my son, Garrett, who just won the biggest case of his career." He turned toward him. "To you, son?" Applause followed. Garrett accepted it with practiced humility, a small nod and a hand resting lightly on Meredith's shoulder. From the folding table, Aunt Margaret called out, "What about Tori? Any good news, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth. "Tori is still finding her way," my father said without looking at me. "She's creative. We'll give her that." Polite laughter moved through the room. "But every family needs someone to remind the rest of us what a wrong turn looks like. Right, Tori?" The laughter spread across both tables. I sat still, as I had since childhood, back straight, expression neutral, hands folded. Oliver looked up at me and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded and handed him a bread roll. After the plates were cleared, the pumpkin pie was half finished, and port wine was being poured, my father stood again. The room quieted. He held himself like a man preparing to deliver a decision. "One more thing," he said. "Tomorrow morning, I'll be making an important family announcement regarding Mom's estate. I expect everyone to be present." He smiled, the expression of someone who had already decided the outcome. It's what Mom would have wanted. I looked at Garrett. He was studying his glass with a private smile. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the tablecloth. Then I looked at my father. He was looking directly at me, and for a moment his smile hardened into something else. Tomorrow he planned to present his version of the will to everyone. I excused myself and went to the kitchen. The only sounds were running water and my own breathing. I stood at the sink, scrubbing a roasting pan, soap up to my elbows, still wearing the sweater I had driven down in. In the next room, 32 people were laughing and drinking port. Not one had offered to clear a plate. Footsteps approached behind me. Garrett leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, wine glass hanging loosely from 2 fingers. "You know," he said casually, "you should really thank Dad for letting you sit at the table, even if it was the kids' table." He laughed at his own remark. I didn't turn around. I kept washing. But something inside me, something that had been stretched tight for 29 years, finally steadied. "Garrett?" I said quietly, "Do you know what Grandma left me?" The silence behind me shifted. I heard his glass touch the counter. When I glanced back, his expression was completely still. He left the kitchen without saying a word. 10 minutes later, my father's voice carried through the living room. "Tori, get in here. Now." I dried my hands and walked in. 32 faces turned toward me. The chandelier cast small reflections across the ceiling. My father stood in the center, a glass in one hand, the other pointing at me as if I were on trial. "What did you say to your brother?" he demanded. "You threatened him with the will? You think you can manipulate this family?" I started to answer. He cut me off. "You're grounded," he said. "You are grounded until you apologize to your brother. Go to your room." The room reacted, not with objection, but with laughter. 32 adults laughing as Richard Brennan disciplined his 29-year-old daughter like a child. Aunt Margaret covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Uncle Don laughed into his glass. Even Meredith's soft gasp turned into a restrained giggle. Heat rose from my chest to my face. I looked for my mother. She sat in the corner, staring at her hands, silent. No one intervened. No one objected. No one said anything except laugh. I looked at my father. His Cartier watch caught the light as he pointed toward the stairs. "Go," he repeated. "Now." I held his gaze for 3 seconds. "All right," I said calmly. Then I turned, walked upstairs, and closed the bedroom door. I picked up my phone and called Harold Caldwell. It rang twice. "Mr. Caldwell," I said when he answered, "I need you to bring the originals tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. There was a brief pause. "I'll be there," he replied. I set my alarm for 4 a.m. and sat on the edge of the twin bed in the dark, listening to the laughter below, thinking, enjoy it. Because it won't happen again. If this situation makes you uncomfortable, I understand. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated by your own family in front of others? Have you ever been put in your place by someone who was supposed to support you? If you want to know what happened the next morning, when my father opened my bedroom door and found it empty, stay with me. And if this story feels familiar, tap the like button so I know you're here. I left at 4:15 a.m., no noise, no slammed doors. I packed in the dark, placed the manila folder in my tote, and walked downstairs in my socks so the floorboards wouldn't creak. The only thing I left behind was a framed photo of Grandma Eleanor on the nightstand, turned face down. I drove to a 24-hour diner 3 miles away, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and waited for morning. At 7:42 a.m., I remember because I was watching the clock, my phone lit up. A message from Garrett, "Where are you? Dad's looking for you." I didn't respond. Later, my cousin Danny told me what happened inside the house. At 7:30, my father came downstairs, freshly dressed, looking like he was preparing to run a meeting. He poured coffee and said, "Someone go wake Tori. She has an apology to make." No one moved, not out of support. No one wanted to get involved. He went upstairs himself and knocked twice. "Tori, it's morning. Ready to apologize to your brother?" No response. He opened the door. The bed was made. The closet was empty. The drawers were cleared. The room held nothing except the photo of Grandma Eleanor, face down on the nightstand. Danny said my father stood there for 10 seconds, first confused, then something darker. He came downstairs slowly. "Tori's gone," he told the relatives still eating breakfast. His voice was controlled. "She left in the middle of the night." Garrett looked up from his laptop and smiled slightly. "Well," he said, "that settles it." My father nodded. "It certainly does." "I was planning to make the estate announcement at 10, he continued, "but since the only person who might object has left." The doorbell rang. My mother opened it. Standing on the porch in a gray suit, holding a brown leather briefcase, was Harold Caldwell. "I'm Harold Caldwell," he said, "attorney for Eleanor Brennan. I need to speak with the entire family." The house fell quiet in stages. Conversations near the door stopped first. Then silence spread through the dining room until even the children were still. Caldwell entered with the calm certainty of someone stepping into a courtroom. He placed his briefcase on the dining table, over the Thanksgiving linens, and opened it without sitting. His hands showed a slight tremor, not from fear, but from controlled anger. My father stood at the head of the table, using his height and presence fully. "Harold," he said sharply, "you were not invited. This is my home." Caldwell met his gaze. "This is the home Eleanor Brennan built with her family's money, Mr. Brennan. I'm here because I have a legal obligation to the beneficiary of her trust. Tori has no rights. Tori is the sole named beneficiary of an irrevocable trust executed 8 years ago," Caldwell said evenly. "You know that. You have known it since the day your mother signed it." The room became completely still. "My mother was in cognitive decline," my father replied. "The document was signed in the presence of 2 independent witnesses," Caldwell said, opening a folder, "and accompanied by a physician's evaluation confirming full mental capacity. I have the documentation here. Would you like me to read it aloud to everyone?" The question hung in the air. Aunt Margaret leaned forward. Uncle Don set down his coffee. Even the children were silent. My father looked at the folder the way someone looks at a threat. Then he straightened. "Get out of my house," he said quietly. "Sir," Caldwell replied, steady and firm, "what have you done?" What happened next was the moment everything changed. Not gradually, but all at once. My father stepped toward him. "I said get out. You're trespassing. I'll call the police." "You're welcome to," Caldwell answered, without moving. "And when they arrive, I'll show them the petition you filed with the court 3 weeks ago. The one where you stated you were unable to locate the beneficiary of your mother's trust." He paused. "The beneficiary whose phone number you have, whose address you have, who was sleeping in this house last night." Richard's face shifted through several shades. Red, then white, then a dull gray I had never seen on a living person. Around the room, the reaction spread. Margaret covered her mouth. Uncle Don frowned. Cousins exchanged quiet looks. Then Garrett stood. My brother, the golden child, the lawyer who always found the right angle, stepped forward with his hands raised in a calming motion. "Mr. Caldwell," he said smoothly, "I respect your concern, but any documents you're referencing can be challenged through the proper legal process." Caldwell turned to him. His voice was low, precise, controlled. "You drafted the petition, didn't you, Mr. Brennan? You prepared a filing to change the beneficiary of an irrevocable trust on behalf of your father, the trustee. I have the emails." Garrett didn't lose composure. It vanished. One moment he was confident, the next his mouth hung open and his eyes moved instinctively toward his father. "Dad," he whispered, "we need to talk privately." Richard didn't look at him. "No, I have nothing to hide." Aunt Margaret stood. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had watched a family avoid the truth for years and was finished with it. "Richard," she said, "let the man speak." A quiet murmur moved through the room. Not loud, not rebellious, but present, like the first cracks in ice before it breaks. My father looked around and seemed to realize the audience he had gathered was no longer fully on his side. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its strength. It sounded thin, strained. When the ground shifts, my father does what he always does. He escalates. "Everyone listen," he said, raising both hands like a judge restoring order. "This man was hired by my mother when she was already declining. He's been filling Tori's head with ideas. This is a family matter, and I will not have an outsider interfering." Caldwell's voice cut through. "I served your mother for 20 years. I am not an outsider. I am here because you violated the terms of a legal instrument you swore to uphold as trustee." "Out," my father snapped, pointing to the door. "Leave this house now, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Caldwell held his gaze, then calmly closed his briefcase and nodded, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. "I'll leave," he said, "but I'll return at 2 this afternoon for the formal reading of Eleanor Brennan's estate. You scheduled it, Mr. Brennan. It's on your calendar." He paused at the door. "And I won't be coming alone." The door closed softly behind him. My father turned back to the room, 30 faces, some confused, some uneasy, a few openly doubtful. He straightened his shirt, adjusted his watch, and rebuilt his composure. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. "Tori hired a cheap lawyer to create trouble. It's what she does, avoids responsibility and creates chaos from a distance." He shook his head with practiced disappointment. "This afternoon I'll read Mom's will properly, and everything will be clear. I promise." Garrett, who had been standing still near the sofa, sat down and pulled his laptop onto his knees. His fingers moved quickly, deleting something I would later understand: emails. The room relaxed. People returned to coffee, conversations, and children. The crisis was postponed. Richard Brennan still believed he was in control. 2 o'clock was 5 hours away. The Waterford crystal clock on the mantel counted each second. I was parked outside a Stumptown Coffee on Division Street, watching rain slide down the windshield. My 2014 Honda Civic with 147,000 miles and a small dent from college wasn't a car anyone noticed. That morning, being unnoticed was exactly what I needed. My laptop sat open on the passenger seat. At 8:17 a.m., I had emailed the Trust Management Division at U.S. Bank requesting written confirmation of my status as beneficiary of the Eleanor M. Brennan Irrevocable Trust. At 9:41, the reply arrived from a trust officer named Patricia Langley. "Dear Miss Brennan, this confirms that you are the sole named beneficiary of the Eleanor M. Brennan Irrevocable Trust account. The trust balance of $620,000 remains intact and has not been distributed. A petition to change the beneficiary was filed October 14th by the current trustee, Richard A. Brennan, but has not been approved by the court. No funds may be released without your written authorization." I read it 3 times, saved it, backed it up, and printed a copy at the FedEx office nearby. At 11:15, Caldwell called. "He threw me out," he said with dry amusement. "Threatened to call the police." "I know," I said. "Danny texted me." 2 o'clock. I'll park on the next block. You go in first. I follow." "Okay." A pause. "Are you sure? Once this starts, there's no undoing it." I watched a woman and a little girl walking past, splashing through puddles and laughing. The simple ease of people who felt safe. "I've been going back my whole life," I said. "Every holiday, every call, every time I swallowed something I shouldn't have. I'm done going back." "Then I'll see you at 2. I hung up and checked myself in the visor mirror. Pale, tired, and certain. I zipped my coat and checked the folder. Notarized trust copy, bank confirmation, email screenshots with timestamps, my grandmother's handwritten letter. Everything organized. Everything real. I started the engine. Inside the Brennan house, the morning stretched tight. Danny later told me what it looked like. After Caldwell left, the relaxed post-Thanksgiving mood had changed. People still talked and poured coffee, but tension sat beneath every conversation. Aunt Margaret stopped my mother in the hallway. "Linda, is Richard sure everything is in order? That lawyer didn't look like he was bluffing." My mother's eyes were red. "I don't know. Richard never talks to me about the finances." Margaret held her gaze and said nothing, which, from her, said enough. In the kitchen, Danny texted me, "You okay? What's happening?" I replied, "I'm okay. I'll be there at 2. Please be in the room." He answered immediately, "I'm not leaving." Meanwhile, in my father's study, the leather chair, law books, framed photos with Oregon judges, he was making calls. Danny could hear his voice getting louder. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving. Every attorney's office was closed. Richard Brennan, former judge, could not reach anyone. Garrett appeared in the doorway. "Dad, maybe we should postpone the reading. Give ourselves time to." "No," my father said firmly. "I don't retreat. Not from Caldwell, not from Tori, not from anyone. We do this today." Garrett said nothing more. Danny said he looked like someone who had just realized the lifeboat had a leak. The mantel clock struck noon. 2 hours. At 12:30, I met Caldwell one last time before everything changed. 4 organized stacks lay on his desk. He reviewed them carefully. Stack 1, the original irrevocable trust, notarized, Eleanor's steady signature, supported by a physician's letter confirming her mental competence at the time. Stack 2, the email chain between Richard and Garrett, complete with metadata. The line, "She won't fight it," was highlighted. Stack 3, the U.S. bank confirmation showing me as sole beneficiary and the intact balance of $620,000. Stack 4 was new. Caldwell slid it toward me. The deed to the Hawthorne Street house. "Your family home?" he said. "The property has been in Eleanor's name since 1981. She bought it before marriage using inheritance. Richard never owned it. He assumed it was his. Under the trust terms, ownership would transfer to the named beneficiary upon her death. I stared at the document. The house where he ruled, where he disciplined me in front of everyone, had never been his. He doesn't know, I said. He never read past the pages naming him trustee, Caldwell replied. Of course he hadn't. He had always believed he was the final authority. I gathered the copies while Caldwell returned the originals to his briefcase. I go in first, I said. You come when I signal. How will I know? You'll know. We shook hands. His expression held something I hadn't seen in my family since my grandmother died, trust. At 1:45, I drove down Hawthorne Street again. The rain had stopped, and a weak November sun reflected off the wet pavement. The oak trees were nearly bare. I drove slowly, not delaying, just remembering. This was where my grandmother taught me to ride a bike, walked me to school, showed me how to transplant a seedling without damaging its roots. Take the whole root ball, she had said. Don't leave any part of yourself behind. My phone rang. Linda. Tori, where are you? Your father is furious. Just come home, apologize, and this will end. I'm coming home, I said, but not to apologize. A quiet pause. What are you going to do? The right thing. I hung up and parked behind the house, next to Caldwell's silver sedan. He nodded once from his seat. I walked to the house with steady hands. The gate was open, the door unlocked. Inside, voices filled the air. 30 people waiting for Richard Brennan to explain how things would be. I entered through the kitchen and paused in the hallway. The living room had been arranged like an audience space. Chairs lined toward the fireplace. 30 relatives sat quietly. Richard stood in front of them in a pressed Oxford shirt, reading glasses on, holding a single sheet of paper like a formal ruling. Thank you for coming, he began. After my mother's passing, certain matters required attention. I've reviewed her wishes with Garrett and will explain the distribution plan. He paused, silence. The family trust will be consolidated under my management. The education fund, $620,000, will be transferred to Garrett to oversee for the next generation. He looked around for approval. Then, with a small controlled smile, he added, as for Tori, Mom wanted her to receive a gesture of goodwill, $5,000. A few sympathetic nods followed. Meredith rested her hand on Garrett's arm. Garrett lowered his eyes in a display of humility so polished it looked practiced. Are there any questions? My father asked. From the hallway, I took a breath, pulled the manila folder from my tote, and stepped into the room. Behind me, the front door opened quietly. Harold Caldwell entered. Imagine this for a moment. You walk into a room where 30 relatives are seated. Your father has just told all of them that you are worth $5,000. He's holding a paper like a judge's ruling. And you? You're holding the truth. What would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment, because what happened next in that living room is something my family has never forgotten. Every head turned. 32 faces, some surprised, some confused, a few genuinely glad to see me. My cousin Danny, seated in the back, gave me a small nod. Aunt Margaret sat up straighter. My father's expression shifted quickly. Surprise, irritation, then the return of his courtroom composure. Well, he said, the prodigal daughter returns. A few polite laughs followed. I assumed you'd left for good this time. Are you here to apologize to your brother? No, I said. My voice was steady, calm, even though my heart was pounding. I'm here to hear the will, the real one. I walked past him, past his raised hand, his watch, the chair where he had led the room for decades, and placed the folder on the table near the fireplace. Caldwell stepped in behind me, briefcase in hand, his presence quiet but firm. What is this? Richard asked. His irritation was turning sharper. I told you this morning. Get out of my house. I faced the room, not my father, but the people. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, but what my father just read is not my grandmother's will. It's not her trust. It's a distribution plan he created himself. I rested my hand on the folder. This is the original irrevocable trust Eleanor Brennan signed 8 years ago. It was filed with her attorney, Mr. Caldwell, and confirmed by U.S. Bank, which manages the trust. I opened the folder. My grandmother named one beneficiary, me. Silence filled the room. Real silence, the kind that settles when people understand something serious is happening. My father's color faded instantly. Let her speak, Aunt Margaret said clearly. Caldwell stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and held up the original document so the red notary seal was visible. "This is the irrevocable trust of Eleanor Margaret Brennan," he said in a calm, carrying voice. "Executed March 14th, 8 years ago. I was present, along with 2 independent witnesses, a retired court clerk and a CPA. Both are available to confirm." He read aloud, "The settlor establishes this trust for the sole benefit of her granddaughter, Victoria Torrey Brennan." He looked up briefly. "Trust assets include $620,000 held by U.S. Bank and the real property located at 4714 Hawthorne Street, Portland, Oregon, to transfer to the beneficiary upon the settlor's death." A collective reaction moved through the room. Uncle Don leaned forward. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then looked at my father. "The house?" someone whispered. "Yes," Caldwell continued. "As trustee, Richard Brennan was granted administrative authority only. He was specifically prohibited from changing the beneficiary, distributing funds without written consent, or placing any claim against the property." Caldwell then produced a printed email chain. "Within the past 3 months, Mr. Brennan filed a petition to change the beneficiary to his son, Garrett, stating he could not locate Miss Brennan. He also failed to notify her of the trust after Eleanor's death as required by Oregon law." He held up the highlighted page. "These emails show Garrett drafted the petition and Richard approved it." He read the line, "She won't fight it. She never fights anything." All eyes turned to Garrett. He sat very still, his hand resting on Meredith's arm. Meredith slowly removed her arm and folded her hands in her lap. Aunt Margaret shook her head. Uncle Don muttered quietly. Danny walked forward and stood beside me without speaking. My father tried to respond. "She was confused," he said, but the words sounded weak. "My mother didn't understand what she was signing." Caldwell answered immediately. "Her physician conducted a cognitive evaluation that same week. The results are included." He placed the report on the table. Eleanor Brennan scored in the 93rd percentile for her age group. After a long pause, Great Aunt Judith spoke from the back. "Eleanor told me about the trust 8 years ago. She said Richard would try to take it, but she made sure he couldn't." My father looked around the room. The expressions had changed. Respect and neutrality were gone. The audience he had gathered was now judging him. He turned to Garrett. "Say something. You're the lawyer." "Contest it." Garrett spoke quietly. "Dad, irrevocable means irrevocable. You can't contest it. I told you that from the beginning." My father struck the back of a chair in frustration. "You said she'd never find out." In front of everyone, he confirmed what the documents already showed. The room remained still. Then my father's tone shifted. The anger faded, replaced by a familiar approach. His voice softened. "Tori, sweetheart, I was only trying to protect the family assets. You're young. You don't have experience with this kind of money. I did this because I love you." I let the silence sit for a moment. "You didn't do this because you love me," I said. "You did this because you never believed a daughter deserves the same as a son. That's not love. That's control." My mother stood. I hadn't noticed she'd been crying. Her hands trembled, but her voice held. "You owe her an apology, Richard. You've owed her one her whole life." The room waited. My father looked at her, then at me, then at everyone watching. He said nothing. He turned and walked into his study and closed the door. After that, the room changed not physically, but socially. Long-standing loyalties shifted quietly. Aunt Margaret reached me first and hugged me. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," she said softly. Danny squeezed my shoulder. "You've always been the strongest one," he said. Some cousins came forward with quiet apologies. Others stayed seated. A few left quietly, unsure how to respond. Garrett stood without looking at me and left with Meredith. Caldwell began organizing the documents. "I'll file a petition Monday to remove Mr. Brennan as trustee," he said. "The process will take about 30 days. Until then, the trust is frozen." The room slowly emptied. The tablecloth was wrinkled and stained with spilled wine. The clock read 2:47 p.m. The entire confrontation had lasted 47 minutes. 30 years of silence addressed in less than an hour. On Monday morning, Caldwell filed 3 documents with the Multnomah County Circuit Court: a petition to remove Richard Brennan for breach of fiduciary duty, a request to appoint Caldwell as interim trustee, and a complaint to the Oregon State Bar against Garrett for professional misconduct related to the fraudulent filing. Within 2 weeks, the court granted interim removal. Richard did not contest it. His attorney advised him he had no legal basis and that the email evidence was damaging. The $620,000 trust was transferred to an account in my name at U.S. Bank. The deed to 4714 Hawthorne Street was updated. The house, my grandmother's home, became mine. Garrett received notice of a bar investigation. Months later, he received a 6-month license suspension. His largest client withdrew, and he moved into corporate consulting. My father called once, 3 days after the filings. I answered, thinking he might apologize. He didn't. "You've destroyed this family," he said. "No," I replied. "You did. I just brought the receipts." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. 2 weeks after the court order, I drove to Hawthorne Street with a single key on a plain brass ring that Caldwell had handed to me across his desk. "It's yours," he had said simply. For some reason, those 2 words affected me more than anything else. I parked along the curb. The oak trees were bare, their branches forming a pattern against the December sky. The wrought iron gate opened with a familiar creak. The porch steps, cedar installed in 2009, still held my grandmother's faded green welcome mat with its fern design. I turned the key. The door opened into the foyer, and the scent reached me first. Wood polish, old books, and the lavender sachets my grandmother kept in every closet. The house was quiet in a way I had never experienced. My father's presence had always dominated the space, his voice, his opinions, his control over every conversation. Without him, the house felt different. It felt calm, as if it were finally at rest. I walked through each room slowly. The living room, where 30 people had watched my life change. The dining room, where faint water rings still marked the oak table. The kitchen, where I once cleaned alone while others talked and laughed. Upstairs, my old bedroom remained almost the same. My grandmother's room held her reading chair by the window, a stack of novels, and the glasses she would never use again. Then I stepped into the garden. It had been Eleanor Brennan's pride. The peony beds were brown and tangled. The stone path was hidden under leaves. The bird bath was dry. I knelt, pressed my hands into the cold soil, and closed my eyes. "I'll fix it, Grandma," I said quietly, and I knew I would. A week later, on a cold Saturday morning, I drove 90 minutes west to Cannon Beach. I hadn't been there in 6 years. The last visit was before my grandmother's health declined. We had sat together at the Cedar Cottage, drinking tea and watching Haystack Rock turn gold at sunset. She had told me it was her favorite place and that she wanted someone who loved it to keep it. At the time, I thought she was being sentimental. She was being precise. The cottage was smaller than I remembered. Weathered shingles, a wraparound porch, the smell of salt in the air. The key Caldwell had given me turned easily. Inside, the space still carried her scent. Lavender, paperbacks, cedar walls in winter. On the kitchen table sat a wooden box, placed openly as if she had known who would come. Inside were photographs of us over the years at that cottage, planting grass, building driftwood shelters, standing in the rain, both smiling. Beneath them was a short letter. "Tori, if you're reading this, you were brave enough. I knew you would be. This house is yours. It always was. I was just keeping it warm. Start over here if you need to, or come when life feels heavy. I'm proud of you, always." Grandma. I sat on the porch and cried, not quietly like before, but with relief. The ocean stretched wide and unchanged, unaffected by family conflict or legal documents. Haystack Rock had stood for millions of years and would remain long after all of us. For the first time in months, I felt something steady. Peace. That Sunday evening, back in Portland, I sat at the Hawthorne dining table and wrote an email to my family. I read it twice and sent it without softening the message. I don't want to cut anyone out of my life. That was never the goal. But I will not return to a relationship where I am dismissed or treated as less. If you want a relationship with me, it will be based on mutual respect, not hierarchy. The door is open, but it works both ways. My mother called 20 minutes later. She was crying sincerely. "I'm sorry, Tori. I should have stood up for you years ago. I was afraid." "I understand," I told her, "but I need you to choose what's right, not what's easy." After a long pause, she said she would try. Garrett replied the next morning with 2 words, "I understand." I didn't respond. Understanding was a beginning, but accountability would take time. My father never replied. The silence was familiar. The difference was that I had stopped waiting for him. 6 months later, spring returned to Portland and the peonies began to grow. I spent the winter restoring my grandmother's garden, clearing, pruning, and repairing soil that had been neglected. The roots had survived. They only needed care and light. With my student loan paid off, $38,412, I leased a small studio in the Alberta Arts District. Brennan Landscape Design was the name on the door. The Hawthorne House became both home and workspace. I converted my father's old study into a design studio, replacing legal books with plant guides and seed catalogs. It felt like a reset. Danny helped in the garden on weekends. Aunt Margaret called every Sunday. In April, my mother visited alone for the first time. We planted tulips together and didn't need many words. My father moved into a rented apartment. Through relatives, I heard that he told others I had manipulated my grandmother. The story changed depending on the audience, but the conclusion was always the same. He saw himself as the victim. Some things, it seems, do not change. Garrett's license was suspended for 6 months. He moved into corporate consulting and separated from Meredith. He hasn't contacted me again. I kept the door open, but I'm no longer waiting in the doorway. I'm sharing this now from the porch of the Cannon Beach cottage. The tide is out. Haystack Rock stands unchanged. I come here when I need quiet. I've added a small herb garden by the steps, plants that grow stronger in wind. I'm not telling this story to give advice. Every family has its own structure and history. I can only share what I learned. Silence is not agreement. For years, my quiet was treated as acceptance. It wasn't. It was someone waiting for the right moment. Waiting is not weakness. My father and brother assumed I wouldn't act. They didn't realize the difference between someone who cannot fight and someone who is choosing when to. And most importantly, my grandmother didn't just leave me money. She left proof that someone saw me and believed I was worth protecting. Not with promises, but with planning. I still have the Frank Lloyd Wright poster from my childhood. It hangs in my studio now. The girl who put it up at 16 wanted to build things and was told it wasn't enough. She was enough. She always was. Early one morning in the Hawthorne garden, I was planting peonies in damp spring soil. The air smelled fresh and new. As I worked, I noticed an envelope on the porch. No stamp, no return address, just my name. Inside was a single line. I'm sorry I never stood up before. I'm standing now. Mom? I folded the note and placed it beside my grandmother's letter, which I carry with me. 2 letters. 2 women, one who planned ahead and one who finally chose to act. I walked back inside the house my grandmother built and closed the door. For the first time in 29 years, it felt like home. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story connected with you, whether through recognition, relief, or hope, please like the video, subscribe for more stories like this, and check the description for another one you may want to hear. I'm Tori Brennan, and that was the last time I ever sat at the kids' table.